Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, discussing my thoughts on episode 2 of the anime series Sakurada Reset. And this was actually a pretty intriguing, compelling episode. This show is kind of messed up, but it's also kind of awesome at the same time. Very much carrying on with the follow-through that I put forth, discussing the first episode of this series. These characters using and utilizing their abilities with a little bit of manipulation thrown in for good measure can almost become like a superhero duo, saving lives, and in effect that's what they do. They save the life of that little girl whom we left off in the previous episode, finding out she's not the genuine daughter of this woman who is trying to skip out of Dodge. She's trying to sort of abandon this child, for all intents and purposes, a child she created with her ability, in losing her genuine child. The baby had died, and she had this ability to create a clone, a perfect duplicate of her little girl, Mari. But it was such an interesting thing where apparently the husband, the father, could not reconcile within himself that this little duplicate child was his genuine spawn. He would eventually leave, Mari's mother in the dust. And it made me really compelled and sympathetic to this little girl, this poor little girl who just wants to be loved by her mother. And this is so moving with Kei and Haruki being able to utilize and use that manipulation to try to bring things about to realign mother and child. Of course, also using in tandem, the character Yosuke, who eventually Sumire brought them to in the previous episode, to link their minds. And I was wondering just how exactly they would go about continually doing this, continually resetting every time, Haruki does this reset. How would they do that where their minds would link and Kei could transfer his memories and those thoughts and feelings of how Haruki felt, of how he felt, of what he observed during a given situation. And it seems to very much hinge on Yosuke's ability to link both of their minds. But we also find out that Kei's buddy has this ability where he can kind of send like mental emails one way, one-sided, into people's brains. And that's fascinating to me as well. All of these characters, this little ensemble comes together and utilizes all of their abilities together to bring about this realignment between mother and child. And it's really sort of heartstring tugging, and really kind of trippy cool to see them all coming together, to see them piecing together what they have to do. Yosuke will not go along with this unless they get the bureau, air quotes, that sort of, deals with people's abilities and everything like that, helps conduct their lives and keep their lives prosperous and going. And if they want to get out of town, like Mari's mother, they'll assist and whatever like that. They kind of are overseers in this framework. Well, Yosuke will not make one move to assist unless he hears from this guy who works for the Bureau that, okay, you can do what you need to do. Whatever effect you need to take, go ahead, manipulate, play around, use your abilities, try to do this. And even if it's just, as Kei says, lip service, it's not an actual, being allowed to perform these actions. It's just... It was then an allowance. He was kind of ignorant to the fact that this wasn't a legit approval, but it was word enough, it was motivation enough for Yosuke to play along. And because he is such a necessary component in that, if they have any hope of bringing this about, this realignment, again, of mother and child. And so to see the lengths to which they go, again, sort of experiencing a day and a half, resetting, Kei brings Haruki and everyone up to speed, and then they do it again, and, it's such an interesting thing. And I love the dialogue, the sort of science fiction-y dialogue about androids, and the three robotic rules and everything, which is a big-time, long-time science fiction sort of aesthetic, And it compels me that they've even brought it that much further with this idea of a zeroth rule and everything, and which is kind of the guidepost to humanity. It's taking sort of that very robotic android-esque computational mind and bringing forth the human element within it, which is something Haruki is evolving toward through the course of this episode. I mean, she's very, as we first are introduced to her, monosyllabic, and really feeling no emotion. She's distanced from other human beings, and it's because she doesn't want to experience sadness, whether her own or those, feelings of others. And the marriage, in a sense, between Kei and Haruki is going to prove the way to, dismiss that, to push and evoke her evolving beyond all of that. And in this situation that transpires, it becomes from heartstring tugging to very heartwarming, because in utilizing their powers and abilities together, they put into Mari's mother's mind just how much longing this child has, just how sad she would be. Her greatest wish is just to be loved by her mother. She loves her mother. She doesn't want to be abandoned by her mother. And the mother could not reconcile this in her own mind, similarly to how her husband could not. And the reasoning, he eventually took off. So to hear it from the horse's mouth, to hear those emotions as connected through Kei and Haruki and Yosuke and Kei's buddy, to hear the word from the child completely pushes Mari's mother back to that understanding, back to that very maternal love for her child. Duplicate or not, this is her child. It was a birth of her own existence, whether it was physically from the womb or out of her mind, out of her ability. And so the realignment of these two, it elated me. I was so heartwarmed. But then, of course, as we're getting on to the end of the events of the episode, we follow up with Sumire, and she's kind of been getting really close to Kei a little bit. She has what seems to be a longingness, whether for him romantically or as a cry for help, remains to be seen, and is somewhat arguable. But I think by the end, it doesn't even really matter anymore, because we call back to that cliffhanger shot of the first episode, a young woman on a sort of rope bridge in the mountains with a red umbrella plummeting to her demise. Now, it was my estimation that was a suicide. The news, in following on, would call it probably an accidental death because she was in, the mountains on this rope bridge alone. But based on Sumire's behavior with Kei in this episode, I have to assume there was more to it. And they even share during one of the days before Reset, reformatting that particular day, she is at the bus stop with him, she has the umbrella, and she's kind of tiptoeing on eggshells in a very roundabout way. Is she trying to bring about this idea of, I kind of have interest in you, but I think you have interest in Haruki. We're falling back on that estimation, that philosophical, idea of righteousness and what makes a human being ethically righteous and all this kind of stuff. But what is it that is at the heart of Kei's interest in Haruki? Is it just that he wants to make her happy? Is it a selfish need and want to make himself happy by stealing in a sense, her reset ability to affect more positively the lives of others? Or is he fascinated and perchance even romantically, feeling desire for her? And he doesn't outright deny it to Sumire, which upsets her. And I felt, when I recognized that umbrella and the outfit she's wearing, I immediately called back to that final shot in the first episode, and I immediately thought to myself, she's suicidal or something. And she's reaching out to Kei, and he's so transfixed by the abilities at hand, what they managed to accomplish with this little girl Mari, his fascination with Haruki and making Haruki feel emotions again, but he's also beating himself up. He's also internally criticizing himself because he almost feels there's an unfairness, as Sumire points out, in his approach to Mari's mother. He can't fully sort of, resign for himself that he was kind of judging Mari's mother, but from a similar, standpoint or viewpoint to how he cut off his own family ties. His grandparents or whatever it was who left, and he decided to stay behind. He kind of, it's a similar kind of abandonment for his own desires, for his own satisfaction. And there's a part of him that feels like even if we have accomplished something positive, even if we made a positive effect on these lives, I still can't answer to my own guilt and the things that I've done. But it's Samir's supposition that, you really have to take account for the fact that you actually brought about, Haruki's evolving. She's feeling emotions now. She's actually feeling something other than that roboticized fear of sadness. She actually feels good about what they accomplished. She cuts her hair as being a symbol of a new lease on life that she was gifted through her interactions with Kei. But this pushes Sumire further and further away, where she needs that help, or perhaps she's reaching out because she has interest in Kei. And when he, in that roundabout way, kind of turns her down, is this the impetus? Is this the drive that provokes her to take that next step, that plunge? Was it a purposeful, suicidal attempt that proved successful? Or was it a mere accident? I really, I don't know. But it just goes to show that it's almost like that, Full Metal Alchemist thing where in the alchemy, as purported in that series, everything, there's a cost for everything. For now, this positive effect, there is going to be a negative effect somewhere out there. And might that become problematic, especially with this sense of Sumire is dead, whether she took her life or it was accidental, she is dead. And because of the effects they put forth to save Mari and reunite Mari with her mother, they cannot undo Sumire's death. So there's a cost for the positivity they're trying to bring forth. And that is highly intriguing to me. That's highly compelling. It also kind of reminded me of the classic story Bridge to Terabithia. If you're not familiar with that particular story, I remember being introduced to it in middle school in the form of a short film starring Annette O'Toole as the teacher. And if you know who she is, props. But in effect, it was about this young boy who had artistic talent, but he was from a very impoverished family and had no real hope of succeeding. He was bullied. He had a ratty little sister, and his life was hard until introduced to this new girl who moved into town, who was boisterous and lively and very imaginative, and took him on these adventures in their imaginations in the woods. They built a fort, they imagined this fantasy world and all this kind of stuff. But eventually he would become sort of smitten with his teacher, who was the first person he was introduced to, aside from this girl, who he just considered a friend, who was, suggesting his artistic talents are something he should, concentrate on and try to evolve and try to, make that something for his future, not abandon it like his family would have, or like the bullies that, would judge and ridicule him and all this stuff. She wanted to sort of propel this passion that he had for drawing, for art and everything. And so he decides, rather than keeping an appointment with this friend of his in their little woodland fort, whatever, to go with the teacher to a museum to look at art and all this kind of stuff. And on that particular day, it was a very stormy, rainy day, and the girl was out in the woods waiting for him, and when she tried to go home, she slipped on a log that they used to cross this ravine and fell to her death. And so this whole situation with Sumire highly reminded me of that. And it wasn't as necessarily impactful, but as Terabithia was, but it was still shocking to me. Again, the weightiness of that idea that they're trying to do good, but with that attempt to do good, to draw out that positivity, to realign this lost, sad little girl with her mother, who up until that point was dead set on abandoning her, thinking it was for her well-being. In the alignment of these two and bringing them back together, making them both understand each other, they suffered a loss. And, like, thinking about how much further that might come into play, depending on how much more they managed to accomplish. This was a small, singular, singularly confined to a singular family event. What if now, as we skip ahead 2 freaking years by the end of the episode, 2 whole years, we skip ahead and, like, I guess nothing has transpired in between that time from, where they find out Samir has died to where we pick up the bureau. The guy from the bureau is going to be setting up sort of an in-school group, I guess, or club that they're going to be a part of. And it seems like the bureau, whatever that is, however far and wide that stretches, is going to now be overseeing them and maybe exploiting that want of theirs to create more good in the world. Might this go beyond just helping singular families? Might this go as wide as the scope of saving the world from nuclear annihilation if 2 combative governments go together? And in thinking, the varying degrees to which that might go, that they might use these abilities, what might be lost in the balance for it? Is it going to be one of those things where the bigger the ordeal they try to manipulate and change for the better, might it be that whatever loss they will then, accrue because of it would escalate in tandem? And so that's a pretty compelling, mind-blowing thought about how this might all play out. So, I mean, it's a very intriguing, odd series, but it had some really cool elements in this episode. And then it impacted you by the end for that feeling of satisfaction of the accomplishment that these characters brought forth, and realigning this little girl with her mother to then be impacted by the loss of a near and dear friend without which none of this would have even began. Just gobsmacked me. And I was just left like, wow, I can't wait to see where this goes beyond this, especially with that 2-year gap suddenly at the end. We just skipped ahead 2 frickin' years without explanation or warning, and no concept of what happened in between those events. Were they continually still using their abilities? Was that 2 solid years of no more use of ability? It would make a little more sense if it was 2 weeks, 2 days, 2 months, something like that. But 2 whole years? I don't know. So I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you thought of episode 2 of Sakurada Reset. If you've seen it as well, if you were intrigued by it as much as I was, I feel like all of that philosophical, ethical, highbrow speaking that was going on in the first episode was a little bit, dialed back in this episode. I think it was a little more understandable from an emotional viewpoint and everything. That's just my opinion. I don't know. Take it or leave it. But yeah, I'd love to hear from you. Love it or hate it. Anything goes in the comments as long as we have a great conversation about it. And yeah, otherwise that'll be pretty much it for me on this. Hope this video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.